This summer day for the 6-year-old boy Rana didn't start as usual. It wasn't because he hadn't slept well and could barely open his eyes the next morning. The night before, Rana's mother was sick again, and the boy had to get up to make her bed and fetch her medicine. "Thank you, my little helper, you're the only one I have left," Carla said sadly. "It's no trouble, Mom. The most important thing is for you to get better as quickly as possible," Rana said, stretching sleepily. He was aware that his mother needed his help and attention more than ever. Of course, Carla tried not to show her despair to her son and, if possible, held herself together the best she could. Rana had never known his father and didn't want to ask his mother about it, but the boy was used to the fact that it was always just the two of them, and he couldn't even imagine having a third person around. The problem with Rana's mother had occurred 6 months earlier, when she slipped on the icy steps leading to the front door of their apartment building on her way to the store with a bag of groceries. When she fell, her lower spine took the impact and she suffered a compression fracture with displacement. Lying on the icy ground, the unfortunate woman desperately tried to get up, not knowing that she wouldn't be able to. People passed by, thinking the stranger had simply drunk too much on Christmas Eve. It was only 10 minutes after the accident that a compassionate elderly lady from a nearby house called an ambulance. Although the doctors did their best when they arrived at the trauma unit, the final verdict shocked Carla with its cruelty. "I'm sorry, but you will be in a wheelchair for the next few years." "I can't sugarcoat it, you understand what I mean," said the attending doctor with a sad sight shortly before her discharge. "I don't have a chance to walk again?" Carla asked, trying to keep control. The doctor looked deeply into her eyes and then replied, "Don't be so pessimistic. There's always a chance, a way out. I'm sure there are hospitals in Austria, Switzerland, or Germany that can help you, although there are clinics in the capital that specialize in treating this type of trauma. Unfortunately, such a complicated surgery requires a lot of money, so it's unlikely that this is good news for you." The doctor's words had an almost magical effect on the desperate patient. At that moment, Carla was willing to raise at least $1 million just to regain her ability to move as before. But when the woman was discharged home, the harsh reality hit her. It seemed to Carla that her life was over and there was no longer any hope of recovery. Before that fateful accident, the woman worked as a waitress at a roadside cafe and didn't have much money. Of course, as an orphan, Carla could hardly count on anyone willing to help her financially for the operation. The woman had no friends, and even if she did, they would hardly be able to lend her such a large sum of money. Carla sat in a wheelchair near the window all day, sadly watching people pass by hurriedly on their errands, not even imagining that somewhere nearby, a young woman was suffering from unbearable mental and physical pain. This didn't go unnoticed by her little son Rana, for whom there was no one in the world closer and dearer. It was for this very reason that the little boy decided to help his mother get the money for the operation. Determined to raise money for his mother's surgery, the boy began to act according to his heart. It was hard to say what drove him to take such a desperate step, but there was no doubt the decision came from the heart. At first, the boy simply asked people on the street for money, but Rana couldn't be a beggar for long. Firstly, not all passersby were wealthy, and secondly, not everyone would agree to give money to a boy collecting funds for his sick mother with a cardboard sign in hand. Initially, the sign was written in uppercase letters with some spelling errors and words the boy simply didn't know how to spell correctly. The sign read, "Help good people with whatever you can." It didn't say anything about why he needed the money. People treated him like any other street child. Some tossed a handful of coins, some handed him a cookie or candy, and others muttered something malicious about how there were too many beggars these days. Renat, at 6 years old, tried to ignore his detractors and meticulously save the money, placing it in a piggy bank. If only the boy knew that to get his mother's surgery, he would need to fill several thousand of those piggy banks. Carla suspected that her son was begging and even scolded him a few times. She knew it wouldn't help, but being an invalid, it wasn't easy to keep an eye on the little boy, who had already begun to feel the freedom of imagining himself as the main provider for the family. Carla was fully aware that, in the eyes of neighbors and acquaintances, she seemed like an irresponsible mother allowing such behavior from her son. Many times she asked Renat to stop begging on the streets and to give up the idea, because to her, it wasn't possible to raise money for the operation in such a shameful way. But to the little boy, it seemed like the only way to help his mother recover and stand on her feet again. If everyone in our city, or even the country, gave just 1 cent, we could raise the money in a few days, Renat dreamed while lying in bed. One day, while standing with his cardboard sign outside the store, the boy saw an old janitor standing a little distance away, feeding stray dogs with fresh bread crumbs and bones. Dogs, cats, and even pigeons surrounded the old man, hoping to get their share. The janitor's friend barked, meowed, and simply took his time, making sure there was enough for everyone. "There's a little something for everyone here. Here's a fresh bone for you, don't grumble and don't be jealous. He doesn't have any teeth left, so he's entitled to the meat," the old man said with a smile. Watching the scene from a distance, Renat was so interested in what he saw that he forgot why he had come to the store that day. The boy loved animals, but having a kitten or a dog at home in their current situation would be an unaffordable luxury. Renat didn't even notice when he got closer, watching the poor street creatures with interest. He could see that the animals loved their benefactor and were eager to lick his cheek in gratitude or rub their wet noses against his hand. The old man waved invitingly when he saw the young boy, inviting him to join in the distribution of treats. "But can I, Grandpa? What if they bite?" Renat asked cautiously. The elderly janitor smiled and hurried to reassure the boy. "No, they won't, little one. They're almost tame. Besides, human kindness is recognized from afar. They'll never harm someone who approaches them with something good," he said, as he petted a dog. "He's old but very gentle. His owner died 2 years ago. Can you imagine? So, for about a year, he waited for him every night at the door of the house, barely eating anything. He almost didn't survive, but he came to me at the last minute." Renat looked with interest at the dog, whose fur was like pale silver, and in whose eyes a spark of intelligence shone. If the dog could talk, he would surely wish him a pleasant day. Renat overcame his natural shyness and came closer to help the old man distribute the treats. The boy especially enjoyed feeding the pigeons, who sat on his hand and carefully pecked at the crumbs from his small palm. The most interesting thing was that at this moment, the dogs didn't touch the cats, and the cats were indifferent to the birds, establishing an unspoken truce during feeding time. To little Renat, it seemed he had entered a fairy tale, where every animal was not really an animal but a human transformed by a witch. 10 minutes later, the old man's bag emptied quickly, and for the homeless animals, everything returned to normal. The dogs started growling at the cats, and the cats, in turn, stared at the pigeons, heavy with the nutritious food. "I'm sorry we didn't manage to gather enough food this time, but it's okay." "Never mind," the elderly janitor said, wiping away a tear as he watched the dogs and cats run off. The old man smiled and turned to Renat, *. "Who are you, boy? A child from the orphanage, or a homeless soul? The janitor asked cautiously. No, I'm not from the orphanage. I live nearby. My mother is sick, she needs surgery, but she doesn't have any money. So I thought I'd try to raise it this way, by asking others. Rana hurried to respond. The old man frowned at his words, his forehead wrinkling in thought. Well, that's a shame. Illness is no joke. Your mother isn't in good health, but I don't think you'll be able to raise money on the street. I'll give you something from my own pocket, but I don't think it will make much difference. My name is Marcos, by the way. You're welcome to visit me. I live nearby in the basement. I have a recreation room and tools there, the janitor added. Thank you, Grandpa. I'm Rana, but you can only call me that. For my mom and everyone else, I'm just Rana and nothing more. The boy spoke in a mature manner, and the old man understood him empathetically, hiding a smile in the folds of his white beard. Well, Rana, you should rewrite the sign. Firstly, it has spelling mistakes, and secondly, you should specify your goals. You're not just asking for money for nothing. Do you want me to write a petition on paper? All you need to do is write it down, and it's done. So, is that all right? Asked the old man. That's fine, Grandpa, the boy exclaimed excitedly. Then Rana became a bit embarrassed, as if gathering the courage to ask the man an awkward question. Marcos, you're homeless, aren't you? I mean, living in the basement and all? The boy asked as gently as possible. The elderly janitor smiled again and once more admired the boy's resourcefulness. No, Rana, I'm not a beggar. It's just the situation. I mean, you're not just holding out your hands. I wouldn't exactly call you a beggar. Well, I don't feel homeless either, the boy said. My son died 3 years ago, and my daughter-in-law slit her throat. I was sad for a while, and then she kicked me out of the apartment. I wasn't fit for street life, so I became a janitor in exchange for being able to equip the basement for my own needs, Marcos replied sincerely. Only now did Rana realize that his carelessness had almost offended a good man. Meanwhile, the elderly janitor wrote out a new sign for the boy and handed it to him. When Rana read the words, syllable by syllable, he immediately expressed his joy. Old Marcos had written so clearly that anyone passing by would understand exactly why the boy needed the money. Just be careful, all right? If you need anything, run to me. I'm right here. Today was my retirement day, so I gave my pets a treat, and there's not much left, but I'll share with you anyway, the old man said, slipping a crisp new bill into Rana's pocket. Thank you so much, Grandpa Marcos. If everyone were like you, probably no one would ever get sick, Rana replied, rubbing his nose. The boy chatted a bit with the janitor and then ran home to his mother. Rana tried not to stay out too long so that his mother wouldn't get too sad and anxious. After meeting Marcos, the boy once again believed in a miracle, in the victory of good over evil, as he had heard so many times from the heroes of local cartoons. On the way home, all Rana could think about was how he would rewrite the plea on a piece of cardboard, and from then on, he would raise money exclusively for his sick mother. As he passed by the bus stop, the boy glanced for a moment at one of the side walls and froze in place. The wall was covered with advertisements for buying and selling, offering services, and other promotional and entertainment nonsense. Rana imagined for a moment a piece of paper with the text written by the elderly janitor in its place and smiled enigmatically. The thought that had been lingering in the boy's mind, unable to find a way out, now took clear shape and became his most important goal. Renaa suddenly imagined that he would write dozens of such ads, even in capital letters. But that wouldn't change the essence. The most important thing was that he would spread the word throughout the city so that everyone who wished could help his mother. The naivety of the idea had no limits, but to a small boy, it seemed very interesting. When Renaa arrived home, he talked a little with his mother and then told her about his encounter with the old janitor, who turned out to be a kind man with a good and sensitive heart. Listening to her son's confused story, Carla could barely hold back the tears that threatened to escape her eyes. No, she needed to hold herself together. She couldn't let this affect her. Renaa was doing well. "He's so young, yet he's holding on and supporting me," the woman thought with respect. Little did he know that on the shelf beneath an old dresser, she carefully kept a photo of the man who had been her first and only love. She and Paolo had met by chance and also separated by chance. Now Carla understood that everything was the fault of youth and hasty decisions, and all that had happened seemed to her like a beautiful fairy tale that would last forever. Passionate encounters, walks under the moon, and mutual declarations of love filled the young couple's lives with joy and meaning. Unfortunately, first loves are often unhappy, and the example of Paolo and Carla was clear proof of this. If Livia hadn't interfered between them, perhaps they would have made it to the altar. But the more experienced rival easily turned Paolo's head and took him away from Carla. However, for Carla, this passionate relationship with Paolo resulted in an unplanned pregnancy, which she only discovered 2 months after their separation. Many condemned her at the time for her haste and rashness in making decisions, but it was hard for the naive girl from the orphanage to imagine all the difficulties associated with raising a child alone. So, in a fit of anger and disdain for Paolo, Carla was ready to cut him out of her life forever. But time passed, and old love, as they say, doesn't rust. It was only when Renaa was 4 years old that she accidentally learned that Paolo had tragically died while trying to support his unbearable wife Livia. The young man worked tirelessly at the campsite job. It was due to overwork and chronic lack of sleep that Paolo fell asleep at the wheel, went off the road at high speed, and the impact was so severe that he died instantly. Carla didn't go to the funeral. She didn't know Paolo's parents personally, and secondly, she couldn't find the strength to go to the coffin of her former love without breaking down emotionally. Later, Carla reproached herself several times for this act of weakness and even visited Paolo's grave, but all of this happened after the funeral, when it was too late to say anything. As if paying tribute to his memory, she carefully kept his photo in a drawer of her dresser and took it out only in moments of mental anxiety or melancholy. Lately, she had been looking at the photo more and more, which depicted her beloved during the time when they were still together and enjoying life together. So now, upon meeting her son in the hallway, Carla fed him a simple dinner and locked herself in her room again with the photo of her late fiancé. Renaa didn't know who exactly the photograph belonged to, so he preferred not to ask unnecessary questions, especially now that he had more important things to do. The boy needed to tear out several sheets of paper and make handwritten notices. Renaa stretched the tip of his tongue with full attention and, with great effort, wrote the text provided by the elderly janitor. Since he wasn't in school yet, writing, even in capital letters, was very difficult for him. After producing about a dozen notices, Renaa felt very tired and began to wrinkle his nose. Tomorrow, a new task awaited him. The boy decided to post the notices on the doors of houses whose residents, for one reason or another, seemed wealthy to him. For his 6 years, Renaa was quite developed, partly because he understood his importance to his sick mother. The boy could read syllable by syllable, but his thoughts and thought processes were ahead of his peers in many areas. Renah could easily be sent to the store or pharmacy without fear that he would buy the wrong thing or cross the street at a red light. However, deep in her mind, Carla worried every time her son went out to play in the yard. The woman understood that the boy was actually trying to find money for her surgery and was doing the best he could. The next morning, Renah woke up earlier than usual and immediately went to his mother with an unusual request. "Mom, I need glue to stick my leaflets around the city," he told her. At the same time, the boy proudly kept the secret and didn't want to reveal it at all. At first, Carla wanted to buy some glue, but then she remembered that she had half a pack of wallpaper glue left over, which could now be useful. After getting what he wanted, Renah took the handmade notices and set out. Due to his young age and lack of experience, the boy made a very unfortunate mistake that he didn't even realize at the time. When placing the notices, Renah didn't know that he had forgotten to include his contact information. Thus, all his efforts could have been in vain, and the leaflets themselves could have been interpreted as a silly joke or prank. But the 6-year-old boy sincerely believed he could do it and stubbornly continued to post the notices. At the second location, the boy was about to stick the notice on a garage door when the owner of the expensive mansion came out. "Hey, what are you doing there? Get out of here. I know you street kids, you're always trying to steal something without asking," shouted the wealthy man at the boy. "Sir, I just wanted to ask for help. My mom is sick, you see," cried Renah with tears in his eyes. But it wasn't easy to change the rich man's mind. His first impression of the boy was that of a common scoundrel intruding to find a better spot to steal something valuable. With an exasperated expression on his face, Renah moved on, and the vindictive rich man yelled at him for a long time, trying to hurt him as much as possible. But Renah had a goal, and he pursued it with an impressive persistence for his age, methodically moving from one location to another. The boy didn't realize how almost all the leaflets had been used up when he approached another 2-story mansion. He saw something strange. At first glance, not much was happening. The residents of the wealthy house were coming and going in the yard, busy with their tasks. Everything would have gone smoothly if curious Renah hadn't noticed one of the women standing in the yard. Was this stranger living in this house? The boy had no doubts, of course. He was right. Renah, as if hypnotized, just stared at the stranger and couldn't look away. The boy's astonishment was easily explained. The fact was that in front of him, he saw his own mother, not only wearing an expensive dress but also moving without any marks or help from anyone. "Mom, how did you get here?" exclaimed Renah, immediately catching the attention of the house's residents. The woman looked at the boy holding a pot of glue and some sheets of paper with a pen and shook her head in disbelief. "No, dear, you're mistaken," the woman added in a trembling voice, and was about to leave the house when Renah ran toward her with outstretched arms. The boy's mind refused to accept that the woman in front of him might not be his mother. The exact voice, the exquisite facial features, and the hair the color of ripe chestnuts were exactly the same as the person closest to Renah on earth. "Mom, you've finally healed," cried the little boy through his tears, not realizing that the woman was a complete stranger to him. The lady of the house tried to move away from the strange little boy, but it wasn't easy to do so. Renah was so happy and content that his mother was finally relieved. But at that moment, a grumpy man, around 30 years old, came out of the house and looked at the boy with irritation and concealed disdain. "Isabel, who the heck is this? Do you have children running around out there?" asked the stranger with an arrogant expression. The woman, who was an exact replica of Renah's mother, shrugged in confusion and, holding the boy by the shoulders, asked, "Boy, what are you doing?" "Look, you made a mistake, I don't know you." "Carla," said the boy. Well, I'm Isabel, I can't be your mother, do you understand?" the lady of the house calmly replied without irritation. Only now did Renaud realize he had made a mistake. Although the boy liked fantasy cartoons, he knew very well that such things don't happen in real life, which means his mother is still at home in a wheelchair, and the money for surgery must be collected at all costs. Meanwhile, the lady of the house looked at the boy with pity and then said, "Boy, you must be hungry, right? And I just baked a cherry pie and some chocolate cake. Why don't you come in?" Renaud looked intently at Isabel and was once again surprised by her resemblance to his mother. If not for Carla's injury, it would have been very difficult to distinguish them. Since Renaud hadn't had a good breakfast today, his mouth immediately watered, making him smile awkwardly. "So hungry, huh? Then come on in, you can paste your papers later. By the way, what do you have there?" Isabel asked, taking the boy's hand in hers. "It's a piece of paper, it's a notice asking for help. My mom is sick and needs surgery, so this is how I'm getting money," Renaud replied, like an adult. "So you're begging, huh? That's what I thought, you all make up stories for yourselves and then deceive gullible people," Diego said arrogantly. "Diego, stop it. Can't you see the boy needs help?" Renaud didn't know what to do next. Just a few minutes ago, he was quietly posting leaflets, and now he had met a woman who looked exactly like his mother. "Well, I'll eat a little, and then we'll see," he thought and followed Isabel. The house smelled pleasantly of something delicious and spices, which made Renaud's mouth instantly fill with saliva. Isabel quickly set the table and placed in front of the boy a delicious slice of pie, a handful of sweets, and a cup of fragrant lemon tea. "Wow, thank you so much," Renaud took a bite and thanked her. Isabel watched with a smile as the boy ate and found herself thinking that more than anything in the world, she wanted to have a child. Unfortunately, all of the woman's previous attempts had been unsuccessful, and this had become her main problem in life. Isabel glanced over at the sheets of paper he had carefully placed on the edge of the table. Picking one up, she scanned what was written, and tears welled up in her eyes on their own. Isabel looked at the clumsy, childish scribbles and felt her heart fill with pity. Poor boy, God, why does he have to go through all this? The boy should be getting ready for school, not going around with notices to help his mother, Isabel thought. She still couldn't get the boy's words out of her head, that she looked just like his mother. "No way, I don't think so. It's probably just a common resemblance, and that happens," she tried to reassure herself. Meanwhile, Renaud finished his breakfast and thanked his hostess again. Isabel smiled and patted the boy on the head. For some inexplicable reason, she felt sympathy for that sweet little boy who, due to a cruel twist of fate, was facing such an unpleasant problem. The woman had grown up in a wealthy family and never knew the problems and sorrows of lacking money. Her parents were influential businesspeople who provided her with everything she needed for a comfortable life. Isabel was an intelligent woman, so she didn't waste time, earning a reputation as a successful economist. Due to her father's poor health, he had to retire from the business, and she had to take over the company in his place. Of course, Isabel fervently wished that her parents would stay young forever, never aging, but the inexorable passage of time sooner or later led to retirement. Isabel had no luck in her personal life. She had already had a failed marriage with a man who turned out to be lazy and an alcoholic. Her current suitor, the wealthy heir Diego, had a reputation for being responsible and serious, giving her hope for a favorable relationship. However, Isabel was confused by his mood swings. He behaved unpleasantly as if everyone in the city owed him something. After feeding Renaa, Isabel decided to give him groceries to take home. In her opinion, the boy was too young to walk alone in such a big city full of dangers. Diego objected to this, but it was impossible to change Isabel's mind on this point. Deep down, she had long wanted to adopt a child from the orphanage, but something always got in the way. Talking with little Renaa, Isabel felt the warmth and tenderness that only comes in the heart of a loving mother. Placing the boy in the back seat of her car, the woman drove to the specified address. There was no more discussion about posting notices, as Renaa had realized the futility of his endeavor. "Will you come see my mom? Please, you have to see her," the boy pleaded. At first, Isabel didn't want to meet the boy's mother. She was convinced that the boy's mother merely resembled her and nothing more. But when the woman finally accepted Renaa's invitation and entered the apartment, her surprise knew no bounds. To say Isabel was astonished would be an understatement. At first, it seemed to the woman as if she was looking at a distorted reflection in a bad mirror, one that altered the image so much that it turned a perfectly healthy person into a frail invalid. But upon closer inspection, Isabel realized that everything was happening right there and then. "God, we look like twin sisters. I still can't believe it, Renaa," she thought. Carla felt the same way when she saw her exact double. "Hello," murmured Isabel as she approached in her wheelchair. "Good afternoon," Carla responded in the same trembling voice. The most interesting thing was that the women had already noticed each other's distinctive birthmarks on their necks, which looked exactly alike. All the while, Renaa stood beside them, keeping his eyes on his mother and Aunt Isabel. It seemed like a miracle, but the women really did look like two peas in a pod. A little later, when the initial excitement of the encounter had subsided, Isabel and Carla were sitting in the kitchen with a cup of hot tea, sharing their thoughts on everything that had happened. "I grew up in an orphanage and never knew my parents, so I'm not much help in this matter," she was the first to break the persistent silence. "I, on the other hand, grew up in a wealthy family and probably had nothing to do with an orphanage. But that said, I'm almost certain we're sisters. It couldn't be any other way." Isabel extended the thought with a pensive look. The women sat facing each other, and it seemed to them that they were looking at a reflection of themselves. Understanding that Carla needed help and support, Isabel promised to solve the money and surgery problem. What intrigued Isabel most was how she had a twin sister all this time. "Come see me in a few days. I need to talk to my parents. My heart knows they have something to say about this," Isabel said, smiling. "Come anyway, Aunt Isabel will be waiting for you, and my mom will be waiting too, right, Mom?" Renaa shouted. "Of course, son," Carla whispered with tears in her eyes, but this time they were tears of happiness, not sadness. She knew that from now on, she would no longer be a single mother, and now she would have loved ones and close people in her life. But Renaa was the happiest of all, and a spark of hope lit up in his eyes. The boy was so excited that he wanted to share the good news with someone. Since Marcos was the only friend Renaa had ever had, the first person to hear about this change in his life was the old janitor. "See, boy, everything worked out, and you were worried. That's because you made the right announcement, though it's, of course, a joke," the old man smiled. "Thank you, Grandpa. Is it possible to write something like that, something that changes lives?" "You're smart, go ahead. Write an example, and I'll paste the announcements around the city. You'll see, we'll find a family for you for sure," Grandpa, Renaa suggested in an intimately childish way. Tears came to Marcos's eyes. Thank you, Renaa, but I don't think any announcement would help me. I'm completely alone, you know, nobody but cats and dogs. I'm not complaining, I live well in the basement. Don't you think? The old man replied in a low voice. At that moment, Renaa would have given anything in the world for something to change for the better in Marcos's life. Don't be sad, Grandpa. I found Aunt Isabel, and you will also find someone real. I don't know where she was all this time, but better late than never, Renaa said. The janitor shook his head and hurried to change the subject to something less painful for him. Telling Renaa about the habits of dogs and cats, the old man felt like the teacher he had wanted to be but never became. Marcos was very happy that the boy was able to help his mother and at the same time find his relatives. The old man knew that God works in mysterious ways and that none of us knows what awaits us around the next corner. Not long ago, he himself led a normal life and had no idea that he would soon find himself on the streets, among beggars, stray animals, and hopeless poverty. The conversation with Renaa gave Marcos the illusion that he was a normal man, who like others his age, had relatives in a secure old age. The old man could have entered a legal battle and tried to reclaim his apartment from his daughter-in-law. But Marcos, on the other hand, did not want to deprive the woman of her cell phone, all because she had once been the wife of his deceased son. What do I need the apartment for? Not today, not tomorrow, I'll die, he thought. 3 days flew by unnoticed, during which Carla and her son were anxious because they were waiting for Isabel to arrive, who had promised to find out everything possible. Time passed, and the woman still hadn't arrived. What if Aunt Isabel is upset and doesn't come anymore? Does it happen, or doesn't it? It happens, or doesn't it? Renaa asked one day. Carla stubbornly pushed the thought away, but of course, she didn't tell her son. Isabel finally appeared. As soon as she crossed the apartment threshold, she conspiratorially announced that she had 2 pieces of news. So which one should I start with, the good or the very good one? Isabel asked. With the very good one, of course, Renaa replied excitedly. Well, listen to me. First of all, we don't need to go abroad, and I found a suitable clinic in our country, with specialists ready to help us in this matter. Secondly, I already scheduled the surgery and the consultation in advance. In 3 days, you, Carla, will need to be in the capital, she said. And the second piece of news, Aunt Isabel? Don't keep me in suspense, Renaa implored. Isabel smiled and continued her story. As it turned out, the good news was that Isabel and Carla were indeed sisters. It was discovered that for many years, Antonio and Lucia had kept a terrible secret that deprived them of peace and didn't let them live in harmony all these years. 28 years ago, a woman named Lucia gave birth to 2 beautiful twins. At first, everything was fine, but then an accident happened. On that fateful day when Carla and Isabel were born, there was a terrible storm that left almost the entire city without power. The maternity ward was immediately connected to the substation generator, which was kept especially for this purpose. When the lights returned to the maternity ward, the nurses saw that the baby had disappeared, and it happened in the most mysterious way. All the staff were in place, and there was simply no one to blame for the crime. It was only later that Antonio received an anonymous letter offering a ransom for the taken daughter. The businessman was willing to give any amount just to have his beloved little girl back. Unfortunately, the negotiations led to nothing, and it was not known whether the kidnappers originally had no intention of returning the girl or if they deliberately wanted to cause moral damage to the businessman. The fact is that Isabel's twin sister was never returned. Antonio then involved all his connections in the police, prosecutor's office, and other law enforcement agencies, but unfortunately, this led to nothing concrete. Many years passed since then, and the businessman came to terms with the loss. But when Isabel told her parents that her sister had been found, they couldn't have been happier. Telling Carla this, the woman saw an indescribable joy in her eyes. The woman covered her eyes with her hands and cried. They were tears of relief and joy she hadn't felt in years. Meanwhile, Isabel signaled Renaa and silently opened the front door. At the same time, Antonio and Lucia entered the hallway. When Carla opened her eyes, she let out a low groan and saw before her the parents she hadn't known since birth. It was truly a day of miracles that gave Renaa confidence in his mother's favorable outcome of the case. "Forgive us, my daughter, for not being able to find you sooner," they said. "I know. Don't cry, Mom. Everything will change. I'll have the surgery, and we'll all live together," Carla whispered. Antonio was more reserved, his thoughts in the past when they told the businessman that he would have twins. Now that the family was reunited, Carla's surgery was at the top of the priority list, as she was to fly to the capital for the procedure. To take care of Renaa, Isabel volunteered, and Antonio and Lucia decided to support their daughter and go with her. In part, this was caused by guilt and the desire to be close to their daughter, who for 28 years had not known their love and care. After saying goodbye to her mother at the airport, Renaa returned home with his Aunt Isabel. Birds sang in the boy's soul because he not only found his aunt but also his own grandparents. Looking out the window, Renaa saw Marcos sitting on a bench, a dog curled up at the old man's feet, occasionally trying to lick its master's face. "Aunt Isabel, can I invite Grandpa Marcos to come visit us? I'm sure Mom won't mind. He was the one who helped me find you," the boy asked timidly. Isabel smiled broadly and said, "Well, if Grandpa Marcos is so good, then let him come." After receiving permission, Renaa ran outside to hug the old man and invite him to visit the house. The janitor was initially reluctant and categorically refused to cross Renaa's apartment threshold, but after mustering up the courage, the old man decided to come in for some tea. The dog sat on the front steps, patiently waiting for its master. Isabel welcomed Marcos, who unknowingly helped Renaa find his relatives. The old man briefly talked about himself, not failing to honestly admit that he was homeless. "It's okay, Grandpa. When my grandparents return from the capital, we'll surely think of something for you and the dog too, of course," exclaimed the boy. "Come now, my dear, my time is up, and I have nothing more to invent," the old man said sadly. Suddenly, his gaze stopped on a photo on the kitchen table, the image of a young man whose face seemed familiar to him. Marcos picked up the photograph and couldn't hold back his tears. The man looking at him was none other than his own son, Paulo, who had died in a car accident. "Grandpa, what's wrong with you?" Renaa asked, alarmed by the old man's behavior. Isabel approached him and gently touched his shoulder. Marcos looked at her with tearful eyes and softly asked, "This is my son. He died several years ago." Isabel looked at the elderly janitor in surprise. The janitor's wife died when Paulo was only a few years old, and the boy grew up with his grandparents. Then he met a girl and wanted to marry her, but their love was unrequited. Poor boy, Paulo was so sad. "And then, he died in an accident," Marcos continued. Tears flowed down Isabel's cheeks, and she ran to her bedroom, taking her cell phone to call her father. What the janitor said explained everything she could not understand. But it was important for her to tell her parents what had happened and that they should meet this man, who was none other than their distant relative. Rena's heart skipped a beat. He was horrified to think of his beloved grandfather being left all alone on the streets again. The boy sat down next to Marcos and whispered, "I'll ask my grandparents to help you. If they helped my mom, they'll help you too, Grandpa." It was the happiest day of Marcos's life. He left the apartment with a light heart and a happy soul, with an unforgettable meeting and the hope that he wouldn't have to live in the basement of a neighboring house for long.